well positioned and had this passion to make practical robotics real. And we weren't sure what robots that would mean. In fact, the company started, the original business plan was around building a robot that could go to the moon, and we would finance it by selling movie rights to this project. It turned into assisting in getting the fundamental technology that is the Sojourner rover. But today, here we are, having sold over 14 million vacuum cleaning robots, and having the Roomba being one of the fastest growing vacuum cleaner in the world, and really changing the way people think about that part of their lives on our way to even bigger ideas. So it doesn't always end up where you think it's going to start, but that was the idea, practical robots.
So with that idea of practical robots, I'm not sure that the vacuum cleaning robot was exactly what the Jetsons or Lost in Space or some of these other sort of writers had as a picture of what a robot is, back when. And I wanted to ask you that. What, from your perspective, maybe there's a couple ways to answer this. What actually is a robot?
Well, because it's getting, the old answers are less relevant. It is definitely true that the machines that the authors and filmmakers, excuse me, envisioned when they first started writing about robots were basically people that did things that, mechanical people. And today, in order to make a practical robot, it's very rare that building something in the shape of a person is the right solution. It's just too expensive, and legs and arms are very expensive to build. And yet, there are things like the robot vacuum cleaner, Roomba, that people feel very comfortable calling a robot. And so, a robot is clearly a sophisticated machine that has sensors to perceive the environment it operates in, some type of a brain that thinks about what it sees, and some kind of motors that goes and takes that information, takes that thought, and turns it into physical action. But I think there's something more to it that has to do with its role in the world. Because a modern car actually fits that definition about perceiving its environment and taking action based on what it perceives. And yet I don't think people think of a car as a robot. And so what I would say, it's a smart machine by the definition I just gave that people name. And that's imperfect. Some people perhaps name their cars, but I think that it gets at some of the essence that a robot is thought of as being somewhat alive, maybe in a very limited fashion, but it is something that you ascribe feelings and emotions to that you wouldn't were it a blender.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's a crisp notion, but I think there's a very interesting concept, and that concept does, in fact, help us think about how we should design these robots and what role they should play in our world.
It's interesting that so many people name their Roombas. I wonder if there's, perhaps maybe there's a statistic on the actual percentage of people who do. It's almost sort of
it's nearly 90%. I mean, either you
really?
Give it a name or you call it Roomba as if it was that product's name. And the amusing thing is, if you don't own Roomba and you're thinking about buying a vacuum cleaner and you're asked as you consider your purchase, would you name your Roomba? And the answer is almost an aggressively violent no. Why would I ever name my vacuum cleaner? With real indignant, that's kind of a wacky question. And yet, you bring the robot home, you turn it on, you're watching television, doing whatever you're doing, and you glance over and you see it hard at work on your behalf cleaning your home. And I think that there is something that goes on in one's head and say, well, this is sort of part of the gang. It deserves a name. And thus it becomes Rosie, or my robot's named Roswell. It just happens. So it's very, very common.
So it's interesting. It's as if it's an extension of us in some way, or there's a relationship that's being formed, almost a pet of sorts, perhaps. I wonder, when you talk about I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm thinking that there is some false life that is ascribed to it, and thus it deserves a name.
You said earlier about it being a smart machine, and when you kind of combine that with this idea of forming a relationship with this machine in some sense, perhaps appreciating its efforts to keep your house clean, or whichever particular robot we're thinking about. Is there a difference between, and I know you've had a lot of involvement with artificial intelligence, is there a difference between the way robots think and the way humans think, or perhaps a limit to one of these?
There's certainly a difference today. There's, it's very difficult for a robot to understand sort of meta concepts and philosophies and linkages. I mean, and so that you certainly would not ascribe anything like human intelligence to a robot today. Robots have much more challenges learning. I mean, the human brain is remarkable as a learning machine. Robots are starting to have some traits that could be viewed as emotions. I think that people have emotions not just because of design, but because they allow us to resolve and act definitively when there's not enough information about the world around us to do something based on pure logical reasoning. And that same challenge is useful for a robot. But is there something magical? I think that we will see, but certainly artificial intelligence, and certainly as artificial intelligence has been embodied in robotics to date, we're laughably far from human intelligence.
So I guess kind of building on that then, is there sort of a, let's say, because you're about practical robots, let's think about like practical timelines or time frames. There's a lot of talk about the emergence of the Internet of Things and what that's going to mean for the future and for jobs and automation and all of these sort of things. How,
yep.
I guess, how does this ability for robots to think and this, how does that combine with this idea of Internet of Things, and also with us as people and sort of the, what do we bring to the equation at the end of the day? And maybe too, you could tell us a little bit when you think of Internet of Things, what that really means, because again, as all of us teachers here, some of us may know what Internet of Things is, and others may not.
Well, the Internet of Things, the term is a very broad term, and it basically speaks to the fact that most devices in our world over time are going to be connected to information networks, connected to the cloud, so they can share information with one another. And you see this in factories where machines that build things can now go and let their operators know how they're doing, whether they need service, how many whatevers they built, and they need more material inputs, and so that the connecting of factories are making factories more efficient. In the commercial world, buildings are getting smarter so that when you leave a building, the energy required to heat the areas where you used to occupy are no longer heated and or heated differently, and so that in the commercial world, having more and more smart devices is helping us operate more efficiently. And in the consumer world, it's this idea of everything in our home, from our stove, microwave, lights, televisions, radios, robots are all becoming connected, and so that our home can take a little more responsibility in maintaining itself, so that we can spend our time with more freedom of choice. If you want to go and spend your day vacuuming because you enjoy it, then that's something that you can do. But if you would like to not, then you can allow the house to go and manage the cleaning of the floors for you. When you walk into a room, the lights can turn on. When you leave, they turn off, saving you money on your electricity. And so that the idea that more and more things are becoming connected together and automated to deliver a very sophisticated experience is the promise of the Internet of Things. One of the ramifications is that there's going to be a lot more and more software that needs to be written. There are more control systems that need to be written. The cost of connecting smart things to the cloud, into networks, is going down. So, I think I saw an article where, diapers are becoming connected so that your phone goes off if your baby wets his or her diaper before the kid starts screaming. It's really quite remarkable, just the ramifications of low-cost connectivity. So, from a career perspective, it means there's different skills that are going to be required and in demand for a very long time, and we need to go make sure we're addressing that as educators.
So that connects with the idea of a K-12 STEM education. So what kind of forward-looking here? If we have devices, if whether it's in a commercial setting or a private home or anywhere in between, these devices are all connected. Let's say they involve some artificial intelligence that they can actually begin to learn our preferences and our patterns and so on. How does, let's say, the kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade classroom, how does that impact, or how should that impact, perhaps, what we teach and how we teach science and engineering in schools?
Well, those are all huge questions. I think that there's, how we teach, does the smart connected devices and integrating sensing with databases offer new ways of teaching? The answer is yes. And that's one avenue of question. And there's, based on the need to educate people who can actually create, improve, maintain, and enjoy these types of devices, does that change some of the goals of the content that is being taught? So where do you want me to go first?
Sure. So, I think perhaps the content, because I think there's a switch going on right now in policy. The idea of, is education about content only? Is it about skills only? Or should it be about some combination?
Sure. And I think that, I'm not sure who coined the term, but if we're in a post-knowledge society. I mean, I'm amazed by the younger generation's ability to look up things. And so, the idea that we need someone is smart if they can remember a lot of things, I think we have to go and challenge ourselves around the relevancy of that old definition, because facts are easily found. And the more valuable commodity that's emerging is, well, how do I look for those facts? How do I synthesize those facts into solutions or into the solving of a problem that I might be faced with? And I think that this is sort of a definition of the term critical thinking, which I think is increasingly important. And I'm not saying abandon fact-based education, because I think you need to know and understand enough about your world to give you the context to think, but we certainly need to emphasize this how do I bring facts together? How do I come up with this idea that there's a problem to solve, and so I need to know the following facts in order to solve the problem. So how do I go and find what those facts are, and then once I have them, synthesize them into a solution? And I think that that's emerging as one of the most valuable skills someone can have in the world today.
So with that in mind, one of the things that we talk about in education a lot is something called Bloom's taxonomy. And it's this idea of there's different levels of thinking, or higher order thinking skills. And if you're in front of a computer, you can see on the screen, I just pulled up an example of how we've kind of rearranged this a little bit. But usually the idea is that remembering, understanding, and applying is sort of a lower order thinking skill. And the highest order of thinking is analyzing, evaluating, and creating, with creating being the highest order. So one of the things we think about is this idea that, if the skill is creating, evaluating, or this higher order thinking skill is creating, evaluating, and analyzing, is really the goal then perhaps of a modern or contemporary practical, I'm not sure what the right word is here, STEM education, to be able to develop and use content with those kind of higher order thinking skills? There's sort of a sense of, be able to create with the content, evaluate it, analyze it, or are you thinking about something a bit different when it comes to problem identification and solving?
And I think that your chart and I are on the same path. I think it's interesting calling something higher order thinking. You can't help but imply well, this is better than that. I mean, I view these things as different skills that, and there's many different types of intelligences, but if you could work at it and become better at remembering things versus work at it and become better at evaluating things, you would be more rewarded in today's society by being able to evaluate versus being able to remember. And so that I think that on this chart that you're showing, we do want the modern education, or if I had my druthers and a magic wand to control the earth, I would want to emphasize the things toward the top of your chart as being traditionally underemphasized and are increasingly critical to succeeding in today's environment, where the premium on remembering is relatively low. And although I think that currently with the ready access of facts, we shouldn't forget the understanding part, because I think I see every day the misuse of knowledge. Having knowledge without understanding what you know doesn't actually set you up well to evaluate, analyze, or create. So I think that it is but certainly the skills at the top are understated, and the skills at the bottom are perhaps overstated in the traditional strategies for education. And use the word STEM education, which I don't think is a synonym for this chart.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This chart is talking about skills that are important. STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math are disciplines
Mm-hmm.
that, with the potential exception of math, somehow along the way have fallen off the traditional educational curriculum. And so that I wouldn't mix critical thinking with STEM, although the importance of science, technology, engineering, and math skills are certainly growing by leaps and bounds in their importance in the world today. So perhaps I'm jumping ahead in where you want to take the conversation.
Sure. Well, no, I think that's great. So, I guess to kind of just maybe pull all that together, so in a sense, I think what you're saying is that critical thinking is not unique to science or engineering or any one particular discipline, but perhaps it's necessary.
It's certainly central to STEM subjects. It is central to STEM subjects, but not unique to STEM subjects. And I think problem solving around social issues, problem solving, around politics, problem solving, in just our daily lives, this type of critical thinking is crucially important, but it is certainly the bread and butter of STEM topics.
So what kind of, one of the models that we often see, and I'll pull this up, and this is a model that I experienced in the science classroom as a student myself, even in middle school and high school and even into college sometimes, this idea that, there's this body of content out there and that a teacher should be the content expert and model and explain and demonstrate, and that a student can show their proficiency by being able to recall and summarize and repeat. But one of the criticisms that at least we have of this sort of traditional model is that there's not often a lot of opportunity to exercise creative, evaluative, and analytical thinking if the expectation for performance is really recall, repeat, summarize, because in order to show that you're proficient, you have to mirror back what was given to you. So what kind of a paradigm shift do you feel? I mean, is this the way that we should continue, if that indeed is a real model that many people use? And I guess if we shouldn't continue with that, what is the paradigm shift that needs to change in terms of getting away from this traditional model towards something that is more geared towards innovation and the kind of skills that are necessary, and maybe putting on your cap as an employer and as an innovator?
Right. I mean, I think that the traditional model does a good job of teaching knowledge, or at least does a reasonable job of teaching knowledge, but not these things that are higher on your chart, because the student doesn't get to engage with them in the same way, and so that when I'm interviewing someone for iRobot, the question is less where did you go to school, or testing them on what facts have they memorized. I'll say, what have you built? If you want to come to iRobot and get a job, the question is, what have you built? Where did you go and solve problems, and how did you approach those problems? And I think that in education, it puts a significant additional burden on the teachers to go shift from this traditional model to a model where the kids are challenged with finding solutions to problems and given enough tools so that they actually can come up with the solutions to problems that are meaningful. I mean, it's a complicated mission, but I think that's where I would like to see our education going. It's how we educate people once they're at iRobot. You know, we give you stuff to do. We don't send you home with a textbook and say, here, memorize this textbook. It's here's a problem. You have the background. You understand the basics of physics and engineering. Now, you know, hair is getting into the Roomba. Figure out a solution, and so that you know, an innovative job poses questions and asks you to draw upon the experience you have personally and the experience you can look up to solve these challenges. And we look for skills. We look for people with the skills to solve problems in that fashion as good employees, and thus, if our educational system could teach those skills, certainly I would have a much easier time finding people who could go and work in an innovative environment like iRobot. So, you know, the traditional model, you know, is somewhat, it does some things well. It's very controlled. You can have a high student-to-teacher ratio. It's quite tested, but a more open-ended problem-solving approach has none of those things. It's more hands-on. It requires more resources. You know, if a kid comes up with a solution to a problem or part of a solution to a problem that is actually quite innovative, how do you grade that? It definitely provides all manners of issues to our current educational system, and yet it is the direction that I think that we need to be going.
Mm-hmm. So I want to show you another chart and see, because I feel like what you just described is something that we talk about as a next generation model science class, and something that we work with a lot of folks on. And I'll just explain what's here because there's a little bit of kind of trade language involved, but I feel like it's what you just described in a sense. It's this idea that students are supposed to develop skills, and so the teacher's acting as a coach and helping students to develop those skills, and then strengthening the connection between the students with these skills and the content itself, and to create an environment in the classroom where students have an opportunity to develop and use the content instead of just sort of try to memorize it, but develop and use it, and to do that through the lens of problem solving, you know, in an engineering context or perhaps in scientific context, answering questions. So you know, away from kind of repeating back, but more towards the idea that we have to develop and extend what we know, because there's very few circumstances in life that there's going to be a one-to-one fit between something, you know, a challenge we have and something that we know. So, you know, is that closer, do you think, in a sense?
Yeah, no, I think this is, yeah, no, absolutely. It's what I'm describing. You know, the challenge is that it asks the teacher to be a coach, and that requires the ability to go and allow the students to go far afield and still know how to give them good advice. And so, you know, I think that this next generation model is absolutely the right way to go. I think that there's a question of how do we get teachers the help and support they need to actually effectively play that role as coach. You know, science, one of the challenges, I think, is that it's a topic that is so profoundly broad that even if you devoted your entire life to science, you would only be scratching the surface of one small dimension. And so that The concept of, hey, let's teach science is a deeply challenging thing for a teacher, particularly if that's only one of the topics or subjects that they're being asked to be proficient in. And so that, I think that some additional structure, potentially having some visiting, support or something else in the classroom to work alongside the teacher could be helpful. But we need to figure out how to get there, because I like your idea of saying learning skills. I think that's very compatible with what I was less articulately trying to say. So I think I like that a lot.
Well, thank you. So one of the, I guess the things as teachers that we are always focused on is, unfortunately, our focus is not always on science and engineering. It's, also English language, math, the arts, and so on. But the reason that we engage in all of this is because I think as teachers deep down inside, we really care about not only the future of our students, but really trying to position them well to take advantage of opportunities. And I think, there's varying perspectives about, what actually is an opportunity, whether that means it has to be college or it has to be, a terminal degree or whatever. But you mentioned something previously that I just wanted to ask you to expand a little bit more on. This idea that if students are developing skills, or there's a kind of a way of thinking perhaps that when a student leaves the classroom, that they're a little bit better prepared for the workforce. And where I, excuse me, I just have a little throat here. Where I picked up on that, as you were saying, as you're hiring, is there something about this type of model or these sort of thinking skills, let's say that that's part of this model here in skills, is these sort of thinking skills, and for lack of a better word, it makes students trainable or makes them adaptable in such a way that they really are workforce ready, whether there's a college degree or a 2-year degree or some certificates slapped in there. Is that kind of element that is that what you're talking about? That's this need.
Well, let's see. First off, I think that the ability to be educated in how to solve problems and how to access the knowledge required to solve problems is useful, regardless of the career trajectory you're on. If you're a technician, you're going to be asked to service an increasingly wide variety of increasingly complicated pieces of equipment, whether it be air conditioning or heat pumps or whatever it is. And there's no way that even if you were brilliant, you're going to carry around all of the minutia and detail that's required in order to solve the problems. And so being able to think about, okay, the customer is complaining about this particular issue. I can go and I can look up what I'm supposed to do and gather that information and create those translations from what the customer says and what is the observed behavior of the system to what is the solution. These are the types of skills that you're talking about. And then you move on up the food chain to being a biochemist or a roboticist, and certainly it's the same challenge, just different levels of complexity and different languages associated with the information that you're being exposed to. So I think that if the goal of education is career readiness, then the goal of education needs to shift from an emphasis on rote memorization to an emphasis on, I guess to use your language, skills that allow the analysis of the problem at hand, the retrieval of the necessary information to solve that problem, and then the execution of that knowledge.
So when you think back on your own experience, was there a place where you picked up those skills? Was Was it in an elementary classroom? Was there somebody or something that really sparked your early interest, and you know, suddenly you felt like this is something I can do. I should do this.
The I mean, yes, and you know, I think that I was very fortunate, um, and perhaps it is the way that my brain works, is that I've always been kind of lousy at remembering. My spelling skills were always very poor. Um, I was in remedial math because I don't know what it was. I just couldn't be bothered to memorize my multiplication tables, and so that this magical thing happened in fifth grade. I was in sort of in remedial math, and the teacher said, "You're bored," and put me in honors math, gave me a calculator, and allowed me to go and uh, get straight A's in math from there since. I went from D's to A's, from remedial math to honors math, and put me in a situation where these, I guess, skills were valued, and rote memorization um, was somewhat important, but not. But I was given a workaround, and so, you know, I think that to some extent I was allowed to focus on problem-solving skills rather than memorization skills through my educational path. And part of my problem-solving skills was learning how to convince a disturbingly large number of my teachers to allow us to have open book tests. That allowed me to not memorize things, and I could look up the formula and then, or the beginning of the formula, derive the rest of the formula on the test and answer the question. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question in particular, but certainly my career has gone the way it's gone based on developing very good skills you know, put me in a situation, and even if I don't know the answer, I'll figure out how to derive the answer from the facts that I can go and look up. So, you know, I think that it was this fifth grade teacher who understood that I could be smart and not memorize things as well as the next kid on the block, and that could be okay, and I could still succeed because I could derive everything on the test and answer questions that others couldn't, and that was valuable too.
It sounds like just in the way you're describing the situation that there's this, especially as you are trying to convince open book tests, that there's this element of determination, the kind of hard work or work ethic that's a part of that. And I'm reminded of a quote by someone named Angela Duckworth, who's done a lot of research on an area that's kind of emerging called grit. And what she says is that she says talent is common, but that direction and determination is what really predicts success, in so many words. Is that something you'd agree with? Is that something that has been part of your experience in a way?
You know, I think that, you know, you're talking to someone who went 6.5 years with his company before we ever had enough money in the bank to make payroll at the beginning of the month we were entering. You know, certainly iRobot exists because of a particular determination to succeed. Grit is actually something that as we're interviewing people, we look for it, and so I'm familiar with this definition, and it is something that we agree, because life, doing things of value, and certainly innovation, involves a lot more failure than success. But if you can get to that success, you can go and change the world in exciting ways. And so I think that the stick-to-itness is incredibly valuable in a student, because as as I said, it's not the things that really matter, that are really challenging, are the things that are in fact hard, and that makes you special, that makes you valuable, that makes you qualified to work on the world's interesting problems.
Mm. You know, since you're a fan of grit, one of the other things that Angela Duckworth says is that rigor is where challenge exceeds skill. And excuse me.
Okay.
I'm being challenged. She says that rigor is where challenge exceeds skill. And so I wonder, is that, in a sense, what's at the root of innovation, or is it something else? Is it more just having direction and determination, or because I feel like where challenge exceeds skill is, to me, an interesting problem to work with. If I'm not challenged, then
I'm going to have to think about that one. Rigor, challenge exceeding skill. I'm not exactly sure where that is.
Or perhaps an environment. A rigorous environment is one where challenge exceeds skill. So in the case of education, oftentimes what we'll talk about is, rigorous. We want a rigorous environment, and everybody, I think, defines that a little differently.
I think that in a situation where the challenges are not immediately obvious, and thus it requires grit and determination to go move forward. If that's what you mean, I think I'm in line with you. I like the definition. Happiness is being challenged and succeeding. So if you live and are increasingly able to go and find yourself faced with problems that to you seem very challenging, and yet you're able to have enough, whatever it is inside you, to solve it, that's exciting, and that's also self-reinforcing to go and maybe raise the bar and look for the next challenge. So may we all be so lucky as to have careers where we are challenged and yet can succeed. But I'm not familiar with your definition of rigor. I think it's an interesting concept.
Sure. So, thinking about iRobot and connections to STEM education, I know that you all have the iRobot Create 2 and some STEM resources that you've developed. And I just thought it was really interesting that while you're, really solving these practical challenges for, people all over, that you're kind of bringing it back and opening up your solution so that, for lack of a better term, folks can tinker a little bit and learn. How can something like the iRobot Create 2 fit into a classroom and somebody who's a student's life, I guess, in a sense?
Yeah, we do a lot at iRobot around trying to promote and provide tools for education. As we thought about, what as a company could we do for the world beyond our products, we realized that there was really an obvious answer, and that robots are some of the most exciting and inspiring things in the world to get kids excited about learning the skills that we're talking about. How does this work? How do I make something that could actually pick up a football or do my homework for me, and that type of problem leads to wonderful learning experiences. And so that the Create 2 is one of the tools in the arsenal of things that iRobot does to try to help kids get more excited about STEM education. And Create 2 came about as an educational robot, and there are other educational robots out there, but we realized that, okay, we build 2.5 million robots a year. If we could apply that mass manufacturing expertise to making an educational robot, we could probably make more robot for less money than anyone else in the world. And that's what Create 2 is. So it's based on a Roomba platform, so we can take advantage of all of the economies of scale that we have based on our current operations, and can deliver for very low cost a robust platform on which you can make really interesting, durable robots. And so how does it fit in the classroom? There's a number of different activities, programming language, and so forth that have been built on top of this foundational platform. They tend to be targeted at late sort of high school, after school type programs or college curriculum. There are some things that you can do with the Create at younger ages, but it is a pretty sophisticated platform on which to build some real robotic programs. To go younger, we have we're working on some robots that are easier to program, and then we have programs to bring kids into iRobot, into our facility, so that they can talk to roboticists, talk to engineers, learn about what they do, and get a first-hand experience of the creative process and the innovative process that goes into invention.
So this platform is something that students can engage in, actually program or reprogram, access sensors, and basically use as a base for
absolutely.
Activities.
Absolutely. In fact, iRobot was built by a bunch of hackers that love invention, love education, and so that every single robot we build, every Roomba out there has a serial port, and you can download the API and use that as a reprogrammable robot if you wanted to. Create just makes it easier, and we pulled out the vacuuming system so that it would be less expensive, and put give you some places to put additional sensors and computers and a nice top plate so you can bolt things to. Yeah, these robots are all ready to be reprogrammed.
That's great. I have a link to the section of iRobot's website where folks can download, learn a bit more. I know you have some great videos in there. And for folks that are in the live session, we have a couple minutes left. If there's a few burning questions out there, I'll see if we can fit them in. But in the meantime, I wanted to say thank you so much for your time, and really for your willingness to engage this discussion, Colin. I think it's interesting that there's so many areas that come together, whether it's employment, robots, thinking, how we teach our classes, and what we're preparing our students for, that we've been able to kind of cover here in this hour. So thank you so much.
Sure. Well, I mean, we depend on you and all of the teachers listening to provide and educate our workforce. I mean, iRobot is a 26-year-old company, and we certainly intend to be around for a long time. And I think that already you have to think, are we educating people in a way that those students are going to be able to get jobs? And from a particularly self-serving perspective, I want to do what I can to ensure that the next generation of roboticists is being brought through the schools and are going to be able to raise the bar from where we are today. So I'm very happy to participate, and I'm very supportive of what you're doing with KnowAtom.
Oh, thank you very much. And so I think this is going to be our closing question here. What would you say to teachers who believe in what we've been talking about, that they see the value, they kind of have a big picture idea of what this is about, but they find themselves surrounded by skeptics, maybe people who look at STEM as just another fad or acronym or kind of the latest thing. And I know in the past you've said robotics has had to overcome some skepticism. Do you have any advice for those folks?
You know, STEM is an acronym, and it stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And you know, I said this once before, but when did it become okay to not teach science in school? I mean, the amount of science that our kids are getting in elementary and middle school and even high school is not what almost every single teacher you could ask, I'm sorry, every single student, because teachers know this, expect. And so this idea of a focus on STEM is fighting back against this momentum in our educational system, which is de-emphasizing science. I think that we've found science becoming politicized, and so that when schools are graded, they're no longer, your scores on science no longer count based on the national standards, and so that if a school wants to do good on the national standards, they no longer need to focus on science because it doesn't count, and so that it doesn't get taught, or at least doesn't get emphasized to the same degree. And there's this huge downward spiral. And STEM is about fighting back. STEM is saying about, no, this is not okay. The future of our nation, the competitiveness of our nation is going to be determined by the skills of the students that we are producing, and the most important skills there are going to be STEM-oriented skills. So I don't know, maybe I'm reacting strongly to the question, but when did it become okay that we're not doing this? I've been blown away as I look at middle school curriculums, and there is no science. You're like, what? That's not right, and it's almost unbelievable that this is the case in many, many public schools in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts is supposed to be, you know, one of the best places in the country for education. So I don't know. I would say that if you're feeling you're surrounded by skeptics, the real question is, how is this not okay? How is it okay to not do this? Our commitment to our students to have careers and to help our country continue on the leadership path that we've played in the world for decades is dependent on us fixing this. And so I would say stand strong.
Yeah, well, we know what camp you're in, at least.
All right, let that be obvious.
Yeah, no, I think that's all points well taken. And again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope that everybody who joined us is watching the recording does visit iRobot's site and grabs a hold of those resources. And I'd also like to connect folks, if you're looking to connect with other discussions, with other innovators and resources, you can connect with KnowAtom at KnowAtom.com. Subscribe to our blog if you wish. It's free, KnowAtom.com or Facebook.com/KnowAtom, or follow us on Twitter at KnowAtom's our handle. Thank you again, Colin. I appreciate your time, and I hope maybe in 6 months or a year you might consider coming back on and filling us in on the next innovations that are coming down the road there at iRobot.
All right, sounds
particularly
good.
in STEM education.
Happy to. All right.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.